Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and members of council. Welcome to our first regular council meeting of 2022. Can you imagine this is already January 10th, 10 days into 2022. How fast time goes by. I can just remember like 2021 was just around the corner a little while ago, but I think it's just getting a little older, or memories just don't last as long anymore. I'm not too sure about that. But it is the 10th day of January, and welcome to our first meeting. Deputy Mayor, motion for the agenda, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council adopt the January 10th regular council meeting agenda as presented.
Thank you. Members of council, call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to public input session. This is the time that we allow residents to talk to council about anything that's not on the current agenda. Administration, has anybody registered?
Good evening, Your Worship. No, we've had no one pre-register for this evening.
Thank you. Anybody in the gallery like to speak to council on anything that's not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we have a presentation today, in which is our MLA for the Stony Plains Spruce Grove riding, MLA Turton. Welcome. Thank you for adjusting your schedule. I know last time we had you scheduled, you were in session and you weren't able to make it on time, so we didn't want you to rush yourself, and we welcome you today.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. And yes, my apologies for changing of schedules, but as you can guess, obviously the legislature is a busy place, so I'm happy to be here in the new year. So first of all, I just want to thank and wish everyone on council. I hope you all had a Merry Christmas, good holidays. And obviously, I look forward to a better 2022 than, of course, what we had in 2021, hopefully minus a small pandemic, which I am sure we will all put behind us. So I just want to touch on a couple of provincial initiatives that have been happening, just to kind of give a quick update, and then obviously always there and open to answer any questions that council may have of me on any issue. So first of all, I just want to say that I did get an update from Minister Panda regarding Stony Plains Central School construction. As you know, this construction is ongoing and it is on schedule. And so I look forward to when that school will be completed. And then obviously we can look at new steps or next steps about the old building, and then obviously the continuation of Stony Plains development in that area of the town, which I know the main school, the new school, is a main and key part of that entire development. I also just want to, I have to announce some exciting news, which I know many residents in the town are going to be very happy about. But in terms of the 779 road completion, is that the Minister, Stony, has sent over a letter to the town, and she is very excited about the possibility for the first time out of decades of conversation to have 779 actually turned back over to the town with all the construction being complete. So we are just waiting for some availability for the minister, hopefully in February, in which he can come out from Edmonton and we can have a little bit more of a formal ceremony. But I know this is obviously something that many residents of the town have been looking for and begging for. Councils have talked about for many, many years, and I think it's a great news story. I would have wished to have this date, obviously, or the road project completed last year. But obviously there was a number of construction delays, but better late than never. So I am looking forward to when the minister can finally come out and we can all breathe a sigh of relief when that road finally gets turned over to the town. Today I did actually have a meeting with Minister Copping and to discuss issues with healthcare that are outside of COVID. As much as we like to get caught up with COVID-19 and the many nuances of the ongoing pandemic, there are a number of other issues, obviously outside of the pandemic, that I wanted to bring to him on behalf of residents of Spruce Grove and Stony Plain. So for example, we did discuss long-term care facilities. I know there's been many discussions about the Meridian Foundation, and so I'm actively working with the foundation as well as both obviously the town and the city to make sure that that project can continue. Obviously, long-term care for seniors is a key part of my own goal as a resident living in this area, and I want you to know that I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that the Meridian Foundation project continues to move forward. Also, I just wanted to provide a quick update to Minister Copping about Westview Medical Center. I know that many residents have always talked to me about the need for expansion in that facility. As anyone that has used that facility knows, wait lines and wait lists are obviously a key concern. So I just wanted obviously to highlight to him the importance of making sure that that facility continues to grow as our communities have grown. As I was, as you know, elected to City Council in Spruce Grove in 2010, to give you an example, the population of Spruce Grove at that point was about 24,000 people. I believe Stony Plain was closer to 12,000, about 2010, if memory serves me right. And now when you look at the phenomenal growth of this area, this is one of the fastest growing areas in the country. So we have to make sure, obviously, that our healthcare facilities continue to grow to keep up with population. And so that's always something that I'm bringing up to Mr. Copping. And then obviously the more recent issue is ambulance coverage in rural areas such as Stony Plain and Spruce Grove, to make sure that we have ambulance coverage to be able to grab our residents when they need help the most. And so that's obviously a key concern that I'm hearing. I'm going to be putting out a more public statement over the next day or so to Minister Copping to make sure that he's aware of the gravity of the situation. We have to make sure that residents in this area continue to receive the high level of service that we desire and we need as a growing population. And also, I guess the last point to bring up is the ongoing saga of COVID. As many of you know, and residents have watched the news, Omicron is making its rounds through our province right now. So far, the evidence has shown that it is less potent than other variations of COVID, such as Delta, but the transmissibility is considerably higher. And so I would just like to take this opportunity to remind all residents, I know we're all sick of the pandemic. I'm sick of the pandemic, but just please make sure hygiene is followed, social distancing rules are put in place, and that we're just aware of our surroundings, because we want to make sure that we can all get through this as easily as possible, and we don't want to see any more people sick and therefore, obviously have adverse health effects which will overwhelm the health system. So that's a key consideration and thought that Minister Copping and the rest of government is focused on. But I am confident that over the next month or so, we are going to get through this, and we'll be able to put this whole COVID-19 pandemic behind us. And so that's all I have right now, Mr. Mayor. I know obviously you'll have a number of questions from council. I'm open to answer anything that you may have. And just again, thank you for the opportunity to come here as well and present to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Turton, and I hope you and your family had a good Christmas and New Year's, and welcome back to back to work and everything else. I think you guys are back to session here, in a week or so?
Yeah, so we are going to session here in about 6 more weeks. Okay. We will be putting forth the budget as well in the, early March as well. And so I will say on that note, is that discussions are obviously ongoing, talking with Minister Tays about, I know the key considerations for the town or the asks are for MSI funding, long-term predictable and sustainable funding. I know many of the municipalities in Spruce Grove and Stony Plain being the same as what I hear right around the province. And so, but I'm making sure and doing my best to advocate for obviously towns like Stony Plain to make sure that the burden on taxpayers is not greater than it has to be.
Thank you. So members of council, any questions for clarity, understanding, or just any comments that you'd like to provide to our MLA? Councilor Plechko, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for joining us this evening. MLA Turton, it's nice to see you in our fine town, and it's nice to see you out in the businesses. I see from time to time on Facebook that you're out checking on everybody's business. I think it's important for you to be out hearing what our community has to say, as well as the local area. So I commend you on that. I think that's a very good thing that you do. I think I'm getting deaf in my old age, though. I know you talked about 779, but I didn't hear a mention of 628. Is 628 anywhere in that equation for us to have road authority as well?
I will say, well, thank you, Councillor Plechko, for the comments. And so I will say at this point, I don't know, I don't have an update on that. It could be in the letter from Minister Stony. I will admit most of my attention has been on 779, but barring, no further asks or requests from the town or from the province, I don't see any reason why we can't potentially transfer that stretch of road over as well. But it's something I'm going to look into and get back to you.
Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Hansard?
A comment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And MLA Turton, it's great to have you in our council chambers. The business about the town having a bigger voice with 779 is very, very good news indeed. My first exposure was my first year on council, was elected in 2001. I'm not sure if it was that year, probably not, it may be 2002. Maps were rolled out the entire length of that table in council chambers, and we all got up and pored over the maps to hear all kinds of promises and plans and dates that did not come together. So even then they were talking about ultimately the goal would be for us to have control over this highway so we can put up or not put up traffic lights and signage, directional signs, and egress in and out of places. So I couldn't be more pleased that we finally are at a place where that can be just immediately on the agenda. So thank you for your role, and to previous MLAs who did their part in their year with what they had to work with, and finally have brought us to this point. I know that it will take the monkey off of the province's back, because the residents will now come straight along this line to gripe about things they're unhappy about. But we're glad to take that role on, and we know we've got good administration to make stuff happen, and I'm very, very happy about that.
Well, and thank you very much for your comments, Councillor Hansard. I will say that the town of Stony Plain has a long and established tradition of promoting economic growth, and I know obviously when you look at through all of your strategic plans, promoting new businesses is key to the future of the town, and having 779 under the control of the town is going to be absolutely massive. I mean, anytime you can obviously remove the province from those types of discussions when you're talking about signage or right-of-ways or different types of enhancements, and having, you know, the destiny of that road in the town's own hands, it's going to make a huge difference when it comes to the long-term and financial viability of the town. And so, as you said, there's been many MLAs, you know, prior to me that have started that process, and so each one of us, you know, has to have a little piece of that story. But I think long-term, this is going to be an absolute massive win for the town.
It will be. I do believe you'll have to get medications for Alberta Transportation, because they will have withdrawal from us.
I'm quite sure. You can tell Minister Stony that when she decides to come out in February, she has committed to coming out. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments to our MLA? Councillor Laurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, MLA Turton, and congratulations again on your most recent appointment as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Energy. Again, it goes to show the hard work that you've done in the legislature, and that you're quickly moving up the ranks there. I appreciate the update tonight, but I do have a couple of questions for you on some of those, and then another item that wasn't mentioned. As we know, obviously today, the kids all around went back to school. And as part of the back to school plan was to include rapid testing and PPE for teachers and students in those to help keep them as safe as possible. I'm curious as to why there's been such a struggle to get PPE into the hands and the rapid tests into the hands of those who need it the most, given that education and in-person education is of the utmost importance to not only our residents, but residents all throughout the province.
Yes, thank you very much for the question, Councillor Laurie. And it's a very apt question. It's one that I have asked, as well as many other members of caucus. A big portion of the rapid tests that are earmarked for the province of Alberta do come from the federal government. And right across the country, just because of the sheer demand for rapid tests, there are supply issues. So for example, the federal government did commit to releasing a certain number of rapid tests in the first half of January, and they have not been able to meet those obligations. The province is looking at all steps possible, including multiple vendors, to be able to supply those rapid tests. We did make a commitment that we would get those out. Obviously, I would have preferred to have those out you know, as early as possible, if not weeks ago. But the fact of the matter is that jurisdictions both right across the country as well as around the world are all after the same type of supply. And so while I appreciate and completely understand as a parent for two small kids in the school system that I would like to see rapid tests put out, and I know many residents have been able to do that, Minister Copping is still committed to having approximately 15 million additional rapid tests put out to the general population by the end of January, and that doesn't include the actual portion by the federal government that will actually be on top of that. So while I appreciate your comments, Councillor Laurie, about the, where are the tests, I asked those same types of questions. Unfortunately, we're just dealt with supply constraints with every person across the country wanting to get their hands on those rapid tests yesterday.
Appreciate the answer on that, and I would agree, the demand is far outweighing the supply, and part of the challenge that I have with that is the prioritization and the control that goes around that. I've heard multiple reports of people who have walked in and out of Queen Street Medical Center time and time again and received kits in the limited times that they have them. And so when we're talking about our education system and how important it is for that to be in person, I'm disappointed that it wasn't prioritized over availability to the general public and the lack of control in the availability to the general public. Because somebody who may not be in as big of a need of those kits could have walked in and got 3, 4, 5, 6 times at the Queen Street Medical Center, and yet we have the schools back without being able to get it. Brings up my second point, that I've had several residents reach out to me with concerns about not being able to access rapid tests in Stony Plain, and Queen Street Medical Center being the only place in the Tri-region that has these available. Is there plans to make those more available for those who wish to access them and use them, who may be limited in mobility?
Yes, thank you for the supplementary question, Councillor Laurie. So the initial deployment of rapid tests as it occurred through the province was, first of all, due again to limited supply, was first of all allocated to central distribution hubs such as Edmonton and Calgary, and then secondary to areas that were more isolated and rural, for example, like Entwistle or even Edson, for example, that are more isolated, locations. As more tests were deployed around the province, further distribution points in Spruce Grove, for example, were brought forth, and as additional supply comes up around the province, it is the goal for AHS is to decentralize those types of rapid tests to put them in the areas that need them the most. But again, I realize that everyone in the province of 4.4 million people wanted to have rapid tests on day one of the program when it was first rolled out a couple weeks ago. Again, the province is dealing with those supply issues. So, AHS and the minister deemed that central areas like the city of Edmonton, with everyone in the donut being able to access those repositories in Edmonton, would be more acceptable while ensuring that more isolated areas of the province that might have to drive a couple hours just to have access to rapid tests, that those areas also ended up first. So, like I said, as more tests do come out, they will be spread out around the province, especially in mid-sized urbans. I clearly communicated that to Minister Copping in my meeting today, and but I do realize that this will most probably be an ongoing issue as we go over the last couple months here of the pandemic.
Thank you. If I may, Your Worship?
Go ahead.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Going back to schools, Dr. Hinshaw stated, I believe it was in our update today even, that part of what we were seeing with the surge in Omicron is that vaccines are working, and that the high percentage of vaccination that we see in ages 12 plus is leading to much less severe outcomes and hospitalizations and ICU admissions. With that in mind, I'm curious as to if the province has any plans to consider vaccination clinics in schools for those wishing to, given that the 5 to 11 age group is only sitting at 39% vaccination for a single dose, and obviously even lower at 4.4% for 2 doses, given when the vaccination was originally available to them, they would just be starting to come able to, I believe, receive the second dose. But we do vaccination clinics in schools for all types of things, such as HPV. And when we're in the middle of a public health crisis like this, I'm curious as to why we haven't looked at vaccination clinics in schools if one of our priorities is keeping schools open and ensuring that vaccines are accessible to those who wish to have them.
Yes, well, thank you again very much for the question, Councillor Laurie. So at this point, from my most recent conversation, both with Minister LaGrange as well as Minister Copping, is that there are no plans to have vaccination clinics in schools. And the key reason for this is that we want to ensure that parents have the right to have choice if their children get vaccines. We also know that the vaccines would be voluntary, not mandatory, However, there is key considerations given that we don't want to create a two-tier system where, for example, some children in a school may be watching their friends go get vaccinated, questions about, why are you not getting it, and then creating a little bit more social issues and trauma amongst various children about why some people are going for vaccines, other ones are not, as we're not given parental controls. It's the belief of the government, Minister Copping, that with the aggressive pharmacy vaccination program that we have here in the province, where pharmacies can give vaccinations at large, is that there are plenty and ample opportunities for parents to give their children vaccines if they wish outside of regular school hours, and reduce any chances for peer-to-peer pressure or else some kind of social ostracization of some children wishing to get vaccines or not. And that was a key consideration for the discussion. There are, even here in Stony Plain, there are ample opportunities for children to get vaccines. It has not been communicated to me about hindrances for anyone wishing to access the vaccine. If anything, the province has been extremely aggressive in rolling out opportunities for those that wish to get the vaccine to do so, and as far as I know from my latest conversation, that is the current position of the government. And also, just on that quick note, is that even without the ability to have vaccine clinics in schools, if you see the growing rates of children that are getting and choosing to be vaccinated here in the province of Alberta, I haven't heard of any concerns that the lack of vaccination clinics in schools is proving to be a hindrance or a reason for Omicron to be spreading around the province.
Thank you very much.
Lee? Your worship.
You have another one? Yep. Go ahead, Councillor.
Perfect.
I'm so thankful that I was actually able to get my hair ready for today, because I was afraid this was going to be a short presentation. So.
Appreciate the responses on that you provided, not only for us but also for the general public. I won't get into any questions on it because you've already mentioned about the challenges with the AHS service disruptions, response times, etc. in Stony Plain and Spruce Grove. The only thing that I would disagree with is that you referred to us as rural, and being in the Greater Edmonton metropolitan region, I would struggle to call us rural, and the service levels that we should be having here, particularly given that right next door to us is a contracted AHS service, and we have our own AHS facility right here in town. It's starting to get scary out there. So I appreciate that you're already advocating for that. I appreciate that you'll have some public messaging coming forward on that. I look forward to improvements in that. The one thing that you didn't touch on that I have some questions on, though, is what is going on with the current Alberta Provincial Police Service, the APPS, that the Minister Solicitor General is speaking about. A couple of questions I have on this. Both the Alberta municipalities and the Rural Municipalities of Alberta associations, in their past conferences, their most recent conferences, had resolutions that came forward with resounding support in respect to not moving forward with APPS. The provincial government also, I believe, had it as a platform within their election that it would be a referendum issue and that it would be put to the public for vote. We just had the municipal election, in which we had daylight savings and Senate elections on as referendums, and surprisingly, the APPS did not appear on that ballot. I'm curious as to if the provincial government is actually listening to Albertans and listening to municipalities, both urban and rural, in respect to how they're feeling about the APPS and why we're continuing to spend money and resources and time on something that so far has shown high opposition.
Yes, well, thank you very much for the question about the ongoing discussions about the Alberta Police Force. So just a small clarification, first of all. So there was nothing in the actual campaign, election campaign, that referenced an Alberta Police Force. The part in the campaign that I actually talked about was striking a fair deal panel, which would actually consult with Albertans about ways that Alberta could potentially assert its provincial jurisdiction. So that was the part of the campaign. But as out of those discussions came reference to the Alberta Police Force. So I just wanted to clarify that first of all. So secondly, I would just like to highlight the fact that no decisions have actually been made about the Alberta Police Force. A key reason why the Alberta Police Force discussion was actually not put forth on as a referendum question in October was the fact that there was much more due diligence that had to take place before it actually can come to Albertans with all the questions answered. As many of you probably read the Ernst & Young report, it was pretty substantial, but it also highlighted a number of questions that would exist around the potential creation of an Alberta police force. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at the report or some of the outstanding questions that the report highlighted, those are the types of questions and due diligence that we need to be able to do as a province before we are even in a position to put forth to Albertans for some type of decision. I do know that as of right now, ongoing consultation is happening. Minister Madu is actually coming to Stony Plain tomorrow to be able to provide some additional information about the Ernest & Young report, as well as some other clarifying information, which I look forward to actually attending and to be able to listen as well. But make no bones about it. The discussion is still continuing. We're still a long ways away from any potential discussion. And there's a lot of consultation that has to happen. A lot of questions need to be answered. I have a number of outstanding questions that I need to have answered before I can openly support such a proposal. I know, coming from a municipal background myself, I realize, and I've sat with many times getting updates from the RCMP. I personally have valued my relationship with the RCMP over many years working in government. I think personally that they do a fantastic job here in Spruce Grove and Stony Plain. But I also know that it's a very diverse province. And the experiences that we have in urban areas like, this provincial riding is very different from what they have in other more sparsely populated areas of the province. So while I appreciate that Minister Madu is still continuing those discussions, I would just simply ask for residents to go through the information, formulate their questions, and be sure to either ask myself or the minister those questions when the time comes. The questions that I have been getting from residents, I've been very quick to pass on to the minister to make sure that he ensures that in any future presentations, those questions can be answered. I do know in this area, there seems, from all indications that I've been able to get from my office, very strong support for the status quo. But even if you do support the status quo, and if you actually look at how the system is delivered, there's a number of questions and improvements that can happen with the current system. And so we also have to be able to look at those types of questions, because it's been very clear to me that many residents are dissatisfied with the exact model, with the exact results. So we need to be able to, how can we improve community policing in our area? And I know that obviously the minister has put forth the Alberta Police Force, but even regardless if that doesn't go through, we need to be able to look at ways that we can improve safety and keep those ideas flowing. And those are the kind of suggestions that I'm looking for as an MLA that I can pass on with the rest of my caucus colleagues.
Thank you very much for that. And you mentioned Minister Madu tomorrow. Actually, I believe that's been delayed, so I guess you get some time freed up tomorrow. I think we're into February on that. And while I do appreciate your response to that, I think the Ernst & Young report and a lot of the information that has come out from the province has identified, as you mentioned, a lot of areas that certainly could use improvement. And I'm concerned about the amount of time that is going into continuing to look at the APBS model when we could be looking at several improvements that could be made right here in the province right now that could start working better together with the RCMP. In particular, when we have our inspector in here, one of the largest call volumes that we see, especially through the pandemic, has been things in regards to mental health. And the supports that are required around mental health in this province from Alberta Health, and supports that are required from our police service in joint calls, in having mental health professionals being able to attend calls in situations which they're not trained for. So I can appreciate that. I certainly have a lot of questions and a lot of comments for Minister Madu, and I look forward to that opportunity in February and continued information. So thank you very much for dealing with all of my questions this evening.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. And I think Councilor Laurie mentioned that the meeting with Minister Madu has been postponed from tomorrow till February the 3rd.
Okay.
So
Thank
again, you have,
I live
you have
by
2
my
hours
calendar,
now.
So
Good
awesome.
luck.
What am I going to do with all that time?
Members of Council, any other questions and comments? Okay. See none, I have a question here from Councilor Anderson. He's not able to join us today, but he did send me a little message, and it goes along hand in hand right now with the kind of current COVID situation. It says, with the current situation and the increased numbers over the last couple of weeks, what supports will this government be making available for small business owners if further restrictions are warranted?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of the question?
So what supports is this government going to make for small business owners if further restrictions are warranted?
Yeah, so obviously a very apt question that I know many members of the Chamber of Commerce have talked to me about. So over the last year, as many business owners have been able to experience, is that we've been able to put out substantial grants and relaunch grants to help businesses try to recover some of the funds that obviously they have lost due to either seating capacity restrictions or REP programs or something like that. So at this point, because no restrictions, are planned, but we are continuing to monitor the situation. But if that does happen, and I'm not going to sit here and say that under no conditions could happen, because obviously we've seen how COVID-19 has been a very fluid situation, we will continue to react accordingly and make sure that those business supports are there in the same manner that we've been able to give business supports and relaunch grants to businesses over the last 14, 15 months. I believe the last list I saw for businesses in this area that have been able to receive government assistance in Spruce Grove and Stony Plain is in the tune of hundreds of businesses. It's I remember when I saw the Excel spreadsheet, it was pages and pages long of businesses that have either accessed relaunch grants or Jobs First programs. So we have showed that we've been able to step up. I know some people have been asking us to step up to the same level as the federal government, but I will admit it's a little hard to compete with another level of government that can literally print off money and hand out to residents. And so the province, just as the town, we don't have that same ability, but we've been able to step up and support many of the local businesses in this area. And that's also one of the key reasons why I, on my own social media, I really make a point of highlighting local businesses as well for supporting them. But rest assured that if something does happen in terms of additional restrictions due to the ongoing situation, the province will be there to ensure that those businesses remain viable. Because let's be honest, these are the businesses that support our local sports teams, that give our kids their very first jobs. Local mums and dads that have remortgaged their houses to be able to pour into this brand new business, and that's important for me to ensure that those businesses are still there after COVID is done. And so, but it's a very good question. It's one that I receive on a weekly basis. And again, all I can say is we will be there when businesses need us if the situation deems it so.
Thank you. And then I just have a question. You mentioned about the Westview Health Service Center and trying to maintain service levels there for our residents and the surrounding residents. Quite a few years now that us as a community, the city of Spruce Grove, have been advocating for a CT scanner for the Westview Health Center. It continues to be something that gets kicked down the road year after year. But yet, I believe that the actual health center has done projections and budgeting of how much money that a CT scanner would actually save Alberta Health Services in terms of time of sending patients over there, sending patients in an ambulance, or just having better care for our residents instead of having loved ones put them into a car or a taxi and drive them to the city of Edmonton for the CT scans. So can you talk a little bit about that, of any conversations you've had with the Minister Copping about a CT scanner for our community?
Yes, thank you. After you too, the Mayor. So I guess the only part I can talk, and maybe a little bit outdated, and I can actually ask for an update, but I had many conversations with Minister Chandra when he was the Minister of Health at the time, specifically about a CT scanner here in the town. It was communicated to me that there were much larger communities around the province, so we're still also actively on those waiting lists to get. That, however, didn't stop me from being the squeaky wheel, and again, continuing to advocate for obviously enhanced medical services out here. Proving or highlighting the fact that the Westview Medical Center has such a large hub of people that actually come into the center, everywhere from between Edson and Drayton Valley and Mayerthorpe almost up there, all coming to Stony Plain to use their medical services. So I want to make sure, obviously, that the center continues to be expanded. But it is, obviously, since it was about a year since I last had a conversation specifically about a CT scanner, I will see if there's any additional movement on that front. Obviously, with the budget coming up, those discussions are very fluid, and I have a couple regular meetings, I know, with Minister Tays coming up here over the next 10 days or so. So I'll make sure, again, I advocate on that specific point to make sure it's included in the budget.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of talking about, again, about our health services and stuff, over the last probably year, we've seen more and more red alerts in terms of ambulance service in our community and throughout the whole Edmonton capital region. And a red alert is, to the members that are watching, is that the inaccessibility of an ambulance in this area if somebody needed one. How is the government looking at addressing those red alerts throughout our communities?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Choi, for the question. So again, this is one of the topics actually that I talked at great length with Minister Copping about, even just this afternoon, so it's very fresh. And again, I just wanted to highlight to the Minister directly about my concern about ambulance care here in this area. And also, I guess just to put on to Councillor Laurie's comment about Stony Plain being an urban area in the greater Edmonton area, unfortunately, I found after 2.5 years that is a battle that I have failed. That as far as some people in Edmonton are concerned, Spruce Grove and Stony Plain will always be considered rural, and no matter what I say, that can change their opinion. But in my heart, this is as urban as you can get. So, but regarding long-term ambulance care, in terms of some of the issues, so one of the key issues that we are facing right now has to deal with people on sick leave, both from COVID-19 as well as just a regular flu. As every organization can attest, maybe if you go back a couple years, it might have been common to attend or go to work when you had the sniffles, you had a bit of a runny nose, and you tougher through. But now, especially with the sensitivity about COVID-19, any kind of symptom that anyone has is all of a sudden causing people to be able, and rightly so, to stay at home and isolate to make sure that any viral spread of either a normal cold, a flu, or COVID-19 is obviously kept to a minimum. And that same situation is actually a key issue plaguing many of our emergency services, essential services, governments, and organizations all over Alberta, is that, you know, currently right now, any kind of sign of symptom of sniffles or runny nose or something like that, those individuals are staying home. I know, for example, in the city of Winnipeg, is that they hit an emergency threshold, I believe, when it was, 15 to 20% their firefighters were at home due to sickness or showing some types of signs. This is something that is spreading in various jurisdictions right across the entire province. And so I know when I talked with Minister Copping specifically about this, is that they'll be actually highlighting some information over the next short time, again, highlighting some of the issues that the ambulance coverage has shown, and also remediation effects that AHS is going to be doing to solve it. But it is something that we are going to be facing in a variety of different organizations. Like I said, everything from emergency response to protective services, and even from other towns, municipalities that I have talked with in my conversations around the province. It is something that is affecting a lot of organizations right now. But like I said, it's something specifically that I mentioned directly to Minister Copping about. And I stress to him that areas like Spruce Grove and Stony Plain need to ensure that we have a certain service level that will ensure that our residents are protected and looked after, and that for many of those residents that require an ambulance, let's be honest, that's probably the worst day of their lives. And we have to make sure that for those residents, when they need help the most, that the service personnel and the equipment is there to ensure that they're looked after. And that is one of my key goals and objectives as the MLA for this area.
Thank you for the comments and answers. Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, I have one last question for you. I think you mentioned you'd be going back to session here in a few weeks, and then also looking at budget conversations and the release of the budget. My question maybe to you and to the members of the UCP caucus is, when are we going to shift from a reactive budgeting process to a preventative budgeting process? And I ask that question because I see a lot of money and dollars thrown at things such as police, hospitals, and all that stuff. Those are reactive to the current situations we have. So if we invest dollars into prevention, like mental health, like supportive housing, and all that stuff, that in turn will reduce the reactive measure of the budgeting. So therefore, you actually have free up money down the road, as long as you can invest dollars now. Very similar to the town of Stony Plain, we invested dollars in an asphalt quality index. Again, knowing where we need to invest preventive dollars to get the most out of our roads, so we don't have to be always reactive and spending more money than we need to.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for the question. Obviously, it's an apt point. I know Minister Panda, for example, has been talking aggressively about longer-term capital plans that the province has to go to. I know on many of the points that you talk about in terms of money up front will save X amount of dollars later down the road. Associate Minister Mike Ellis, in charge of mental health, has been extremely proactive and aggressive in putting forth programs that will do exactly with what you're talking about. We have put forth the greatest and the highest number of recovery beds when it comes to opioid and addiction recovery in our province's history. In essence, to do the exact thing that you're talking about, is to put and invest dollars which will help out people today, which will actually result in cost savings down the road. However, I do realize that there are countless examples where we could be investing in to a much greater extent. However, you know, on many in many areas, there's obviously such a huge pent-up demand for infrastructure, like you said, for hospitals, for police stations, for roads, you know, all over the entire province, that it's always a challenge to be able to take those limited tax dollars and to be able to spread them out to make sure that many of the programs and services that you're talking about can be funded. You know, it's also interesting, not interesting, but you know, I do have to mention it, is that almost a year ago, the province went through one of the worst energy crashes in our province's history. And so that had enormous financial ramifications to the province. Yes, we're looking good now, but there was a time approximately about 14 months ago. It was one of the scariest times in this province's history when it came to one of our largest sectors. You know, you add on top of that the ongoing battle of COVID-19, the added financial pressures that the province has to step up, both for business supports to help out businesses stay solvent, as well as the additional financial supports given to educational school boards to deal with their COVID-19 response, as well as just the ongoing costs of the pandemic itself. So while I appreciate that there's always those opportunities, I am always looking for those opportunities I can advocate with Minister Taze about. I think that, you know, as fellow leaders here in Stony Plain with a vested interest to ensure that taxpayer dollars are spent well, you would understand that there's only so much you can do with the tax dollars at your disposal, and the province is no different. You just add on about 4 more zeros and we're in the exact same boat.
Good. And my final thought, I don't think anybody has their hand up, but in terms of working together as the Legislative Assembly of Alberta, any chances or thoughts maybe going down the road about having a strategic plan that all members of Legislative Assembly are privy to and can contribute to, and not just the party that is currently in power? And I ask that because you mentioned long-term capital plans and the ability to have preventive budgeting versus reactive budgeting, and looking what's best for Albertans and not what's best for the current party that's in power. And I bring that and ask that question based on my municipal experience. When I first got into council, elections were every 3 years. And at that time, we got together as a team, everybody that was elected, regardless of how you thought, but we came up with a strategic plan or direction for our community, so similar to the plan for the province. But can you imagine if every 3 years, and now every 4 years, that a new council came here, scrapped everything that the previous council did without any strategic plan because they just thought differently? The waste of dollars, the waste of time, everything else. And I know that each party has their own strategic plan and how to move the province forward. But wouldn't it be beneficial to have a strategic plan where all members of the Legislative Assembly are together to talk about it?
Well, thank you very much for the, more so, I would consider be a bit of a philosophical question, Mayor Choi, about the new Westminster system and the party-based system that have governed, especially British colonies, for about the last couple hundred years. While philosophically it would be an interesting conversation, and I have thought many times about the similarities and differences between municipal government and provincial government. I mean, there are some long-standing differences, obviously, in between the two levels of government. But I will say that contrary to some individuals saying that what one party wants and another one doesn't, for example, there are many areas actually at the legislature, not enough, mind you, where both parties and all political parties do tend to work together. For example, Bill 82. which is the Rare Earth Resource Act, which came forth, was a rare act of legislation, piece of legislation, where both parties decided to work together to be able to push through. I mean, that's going to, in essence, change and revolutionize and diversify the Albertan economy, which is going to benefit all of our residents. Extended producer responsibility, a motion and bill that I feel very near and dear to, where I put forth a motion last fall urging the Alberta government to put forth or move forward with extended producer responsibility. That was supported by everyone unanimously in the legislature. A rare sign of bipartisan support for an incredible piece of environmental legislation that not only is an absolute win for the environment, it's a win for taxpayers, and it's obviously, it shows what could potentially be. So while I appreciate, Mayor Choi, your comments about, reforming the new Westminster system, unfortunately, that's a little bit higher than my pay grade, but it is interesting and appreciative to know that there are people wanting a higher level of decorum, and that is what I've tried to bring as a local MLA to this area, to show respect, to show some class, to know that every time I open my mouth at the legislature, I'm representing Stony, Plain, and Spruce Grove. And I want to make sure that for the 57,000 or 58,000 residents in this provincial riding, that from their local representatives, they have leaders that they can respect and that they feel proud to represent their home. And I do think we have that both with yourself and then Mayor Acker, and then as well as our MP Dane Lloyd. So I think you have a stellar group of elected leaders representing this area, but it is a good message that you bring, Mayor Choi, about the need for all of us to be able to have higher levels of decorum, work together when we can, and find those areas that we can actually advance the interest of all of our residents.
Thank you for sharing your comments, your perspective. On behalf of council and the members of our communities, thank you for your representation of our communities at the legislature. I know it's not easy, but it is a tough job and somebody has to do it. And I'm happy that you are. I'm happy that I still call you my friend from time to time, even though we disagree on a lot of things, and we agree on a lot of things. I think you, especially coming from a municipal background, understand that. But it doesn't matter what your political stripes are, right? It's looking at what's best for our communities and our province. And I think the more decorum we have, then the more that we start thinking that way, I think the better the governments that we'll have in Alberta.
Yes, and just one quick closing comment, Mr. Mayor, is that I also like to thank Stony Plain Council and the administration. From my office, the constituency office, I have to say, Mr. Mayor, that your staff have been absolutely top-notch. And they've allowed me to be able to access information that I can bring to the legislature. And I also want to thank you as well, Mr. Mayor, for your hard questions and the other councillors. I know I have everyone's cell phone numbers, and I appreciate the ad hoc and quick questions and text messages that I get from members of Stony Plain Council. And I will say it's always in a respectful manner, which I appreciate, and it's also direct, but I also know that for the 7 of you, you've never hesitated to hold me to account, and that's what it's all about, is accountability and making sure that we're all rowing in the same direction so that, again, our residents here in Stony Plain can continue to live in, I think, the greatest town in the entire province.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm pretty sure that when you go to Spruce Grove, you say that's the greatest community in the province. So I take that with a grain of salt.
Well, that's why I said greatest town. And so I'm a town and a city, so I can keep my story straight.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Our staff will reach out to schedule the next update, which is probably after the spring session.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Hey, members of council, there's no more presentations. Moving on, number 5 of our agenda is statutory public hearings. We don't have nothing scheduled today. Next is number 6 is the adoption of our council meeting minutes for December 13th. Councillor Hansard, please.
Mr. Mayor, I move that town council approve the regular council meeting minutes of December 13, 2021 as presented.
Good. Thank you, members of council. You had a chance to read them. Any errors or omissions in the minutes? I didn't see any others, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay, and that is carried. Okay. There are no committee or board meetings to approve, no bylaws, no business items, no information. So moving on to council discussion and information items that council would like to bring to the table or pass those along to our staff. Councilor Hansard?
Mr. Mayor, I just want to commend our Public Works Department. I know these last few weeks have not been easy on them. Normally, their job is not easy in the winter, but when it comes to dealing with the ultra-cold weather that we've had, honestly, I have a daughter who works in Public Works with the City of Spruce Grove, and every day I get up and I think about everybody in that kind of service, our firefighters and that type of thing, that they will be safe. And should anything come up where they get exposed, that they get help and not end up with permanent damage to their bodies. But honestly, I've driven around town and I've watched the various machinery. I was really surprised to see them at work on 44th Avenue, which is a major thoroughfare in my neighborhood, clearing snow. And I was really surprised at how tall the windrow was, because it's down there and you don't realize what's packed on the ground until it gets pulled up and made this little mountain down the middle of the road. So I know there's a lot of things going on social media that have comments about lack of service, but honestly, I'd like to refute that right here, right now, and just let my respect for the work that our town staff, all of town staff does, but in keeping that department functional and operational, and for realizing when times are pressing on the amount of manpower needed to get things done, that contracts get let out, even short-term contracts, to get the work done. So thank you very much, Mr. Golden, if you would be willing to pass that on to all the Public Works staff.
Thank you, Councilor Hansard. Anything else?
Nothing for me.
Councilor Lowry?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would echo some of the sentiments of Councillor Hansard in regards to our Public Works Department, especially over the holidays when we know staffing levels are a little bit lower. There was a lot of work to be done, and I think they definitely did their best. I did express one concern to the town manager through email, and I'll just share it here again, though, in regards to our Public Works and some of the fire hydrants in some of the Plowicides area. Have noticed in many of the Plowicide areas that some of the fire hydrants were buried and others left very hard to see and hard to access. I do know, and I have seen over the last little while, that this has started to be addressed, but definitely something that I'd like to see us avoid in the future, if at all possible, and making sure that we don't leave them inaccessible for any point in time. Unfortunately, just before Christmas there, we had a perfect example of a fire that occurred in the Heritage Estates, I believe it was subdivision, and in speaking to a couple of people, apparently the fire hydrant was very hard to find because it was buried. And so that delayed the ability to get water to the truck, which makes delays. And so, wanting to see those going forward. And I do know that there's been some communications put out through our communications channels as well for those on residential properties. So just reminding anybody who is tuning in, be a good neighbor. If you do have a fire hydrant on your property, make sure it's clear and accessible because you never know when 1 minute can make a big difference. The only other thing I have is I just had a resident who reached out in regards to the Fairway skating oval. Just wondering if we would be able to get some benches there. Apparently there are no benches there, so it's very hard if they're bringing kids to skate. They're not able to have anywhere that they can kind of help them get their skates on and things like that. So if that could just be passed along to the general manager and get a couple of our benches out there so that can be enjoyed, that would be great. Other than that, that's all for me this evening, Your Worship.
Thank you much, Councilor Lowry. Councilor Loyens?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to echo the same statements as my previous councillors, that Public Works did an amazing job over Christmas. I want to also say thank you to our CMP detachment. There was an incident on Main Street just after Christmas with a person outside of the CIBC Bank, and our CMP was called, and within 10 minutes they were there. It was after hours, they were having a little fire, and were able to defuse the situation very quickly. So a shout out to them for all their hard work and what they do.
Thank you much. Councilor Pechko?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I echo the same thing as everybody's talking about. Public Works has done a fantastic job. But I also want to commend those that put on our New Year's Eve fireworks. I think they were very, very respectful. They did a fantastic job. It was well received within our community, and there was loads and loads and loads of people out in cars. So even though cold weather and the guys putting them up were probably froze, fantastic job. So kudos to them as well. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you into 2022. I think brighter things for the future of Stony Plain.
Thank you, Councilor Pashko. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. Nothing this evening.
Thank you. And then for me, I just want to echo the same comments which councillors have already kind of give accolades to our public works. For the last few weeks, I've been driving back and forth to Edmonton quite a bit. Take my wife in because she had a little surgery on her eye, so it's been back and forth a couple weeks. And the quality of work that is done in our community surpasses anything that's done in the city of Edmonton, in terms of clearing main arterial roads and residential roads. So I think we get into a rut, pardon my pun, in Stony Plain as we get used to seeing the service levels be so well and so efficient. And when we have kind of a large dumper snow that's very heavy, we tend to forget the amount of snow that we had. We just think it should be done the same as the last year when we just had a very little bit of snow. So it takes people to get outside of our communities to drive around to figure out that actually our public works staff do an amazing job. So again, kudos to our staff, and just want to echo that as well. And then to our staff in terms of what they're doing in our community for the Christmas celebrations. A lot of accolades from members of the public regarding Rotary Park. They've just loved it. The lights, the ability to skate there, the ability to walk around the little pathway with all lights around it. That has been phenomenal this year, a lot better than we've had in the past. So definitely passing those remarks around. Okay. And with that, we are adjourned tonight. So thank you very much. Take care.